The music industry generates a reported $30 billion every single year, and 100,000 tracks are released every single day. And get this, 90% of the streams on Spotify go to 1% of the artists. As the space gets noisier and as artists get more frustrated that their music isn't getting heard, is this the fault of the music industry, or is this a lack of ability to write a good song? Now, there are many articles and videos about songwriting dying. Rick Beato has made some incredibly insightful videos around chart top 10s and music getting worse. So why is this? Why is music getting worse? And what can we do about it? And more importantly, how can songwriting be getting worse if music is subjective? Well, let's start at the beginning. Music has always been attached to something, and music has always adapted to the format that it is attached to. So take radio as an example. Radio dictated that songs should be 3 minutes long with no intro, they should be driving tempo, no swearing, probably simple arrangement, verse, chorus, middle eight, chorus. Why? Because we need to keep the attention on radio, and why is that? Because of the money, because the more people who are listening, the more advertising revenue that we can bring in, and that generates the cash. So for several decades, the music industry adhered to those rules because that was what music was attached to, and that was the easiest way of getting music heard. And of course, there were always going to be rules that would be broken, Bohemian Rhapsody being a classic example, or God Only Knows by the Beach Boys. The track establishes the key of E major, but then it changes the key going into the verse. So the song is in 2 keys, which is polytonality. And then the chorus is just 4 bars long. God only knows what I'd be without you. Bong, ba bong, bong. That's literally the entirety of the chorus. And yet this song is the perfect radio hit, clocking in just under 3 minutes. And 57 years later, it still stands the test of time. Rolling Stone said this is in the top 10 songs of all times. But whilst it breaks all of the rules, it doesn't break the golden rule, which is people won't change the dial when they listen to the song. So with the idea of music being attached to something, along came vinyl. And vinyl allowed record labels to monetize artists and monetize music a lot easier and more effectively. Before vinyl, sort of improvisation was more of a thing. In fact, when vinyl came along, there was a huge uproar in the same way as there is for TikTok right now, saying this is bullshit because what you are doing is you are killing the art of improvisation and you are taking away the format of the live show and you are replacing a one-off version, which is just rinse and repeat, that you will listen to again and again on vinyl. People didn't like it. But over time, people got used to the idea and adapted to vinyl, and by 1982, over 800 million vinyl records were sold worldwide. Now, this was a bit of a shift because this is where commercialism kind of began to influence the artistic process. Now, what I mean by that is record labels and artists began to realize that certain rules that were made for radio perhaps could be changed for the benefit of selling vinyl. So fast forward a few years and along came CDs. CDs took the vinyl 44-minute format and changed it into a 74-minute format, which allowed artists to be a bit more free with their creativeness, which meant songs could be longer. They could have more songs. There was different rules that were adapted because of CDs that there were there when you had vinyl. And while radio was still around, so you still had a big format for 3-minute songs, CDs said, yeah, but there's something different. We don't have to have that 3-minute format. We can have different rules, and now we can sell CDs. And in 2000, there were nearly 1 billion CDs sold in the US alone. So as we can see, music has always been attached to something, but now it's not attached to something physical. Now it's attached to short-form content like TikTok, and TikTok has become the #1 place for discovery for music across the world. But what this means, due to the parameters of TikTok and the format and the consumer, is you've got a couple of seconds to get that hook away. So that's changed the dynamic of songwriting and the music industry in general. Now, you might say that you don't use TikTok and it's not where you find your music, but a report from MRC said 67% of all of the users on TikTok discover new music from the platform. So you can see how powerful a platform TikTok is right now for the music industry. But here's the thing, this is not a TikTok problem. This is a society problem. This has gone from long form content into short form content, and a lot of people spent a lot of time scrolling through short form content. And because of that, the music has adapted to where it's going to get found. This is an evolutionary shift in the same way as that music used to be expensive and now it isn't, because you used to have to pay for a studio, which was thousands of dollars per day, and you were probably in the studio for a long period of time. You'd have to have manufacturing. How are you going to afford to manufacture 100,000 CDs? The network, the distribution, how do you afford to get those 100,000 CDs into the shops all over the country? That was only in the power of record labels, whereas nowadays it's very, very different. You can, not saying you have to, but you can make music for free, and you can distribute it for a very small amount of money, and you can get people all over the world to find your music for free if you play the game in the right way. And because of the dominance of music distribution, because we don't buy music in the same way as we used to, and the distribution of royalties, what that means is everyone is playing a very, very different game. And when you're playing a different game and the music is attached to something, i.e. short form content, it has to adapt to the thing that you're trying to do. So what does this mean, and is there validity to the argument that songwriting is dying? Well, possibly, because what labels are now looking for is less of a Michelin-starred restaurant and more of a McDonald's approach. And guess what? So are most people. They want that rinse and repeat. They just want more and more. The fast food consumption of socials, the fast food consumption of music. Yes, I've had it. I want another one. Yes, I've had it. I want another one. It used to be the case that somebody would watch a film 10, 20, 30, 40 times. Now it's just simply, I've seen it. I don't need to see it again. The whole world has a quantity over quality mindset. Spotify uploads 60,000 tracks every single day. And what we're looking for is something that will keep us going for a couple of days, maybe a couple of weeks in our life playlist, and then we're on to the next song. And those songs get forgotten. And this leads to homogenization, where everything starts to feel and sound exactly the same. In fact, Spotify kind of are looking for that homogenization because they can't take risks. Let's say you get to the end of a playlist on Spotify, and Spotify says, don't worry, I'll keep the music coming. And now what it's saying is, I have to guess what you want to hear. And if I get this wrong, then you are probably going to either switch Spotify off and go somewhere else, and I'm going to lose revenue. I'm going to lose you off the platform. And that's a huge problem. So therefore, why would I take any risks? And that example on Spotify is the algorithm that goes across every single platform. The platform's job is to keep you on the platform for as long as possible. So it wants to find something that you want to watch. And the last thing it wants to do is scare you or give you something that you don't want so that you leave the platform. And so comes homogenization. I was watching an amazing Rick Beato video the other day, and he was talking about the top 10 tracks, and he was saying there's just not much dynamics anymore. Like, there's just no dynamics in music anymore like there used to be. You can see why. The dynamics is something that could potentially give you that fight, flight, or flight mode when you are listening to something on Spotify. Oh, I wasn't expecting this. Off it goes. So not only Spotify, the algorithm, but also the artists are saying, hang on, let's keep this as simple as possible. And now for me, here comes the most important part of this entire scenario, which is the lack of A&R in the music industry, of which I probably will make a proper video just about the lack of A&R in the music industry. But A&R is still in the music industry, but it's nowhere near what it used to be. A&R now is thought of mostly as discovery, but discovery is mostly from platforms like TikTok, Instagram, etc. Now, A&R didn't used to be discovery. A&R used to be the process from discovery right through to delivery. So people who were involved in the A&R were involved in the development of the artist, how to get the most out of the artist, how to develop an artist, because an artist nowadays is just on their own. An artist says, I've got to do everything myself. And not only am I trying to do the promotion and the marketing and the managing, I've got to figure out who I am and my identity and who I represent and what they want. And I've got to be consistent in doing that, which makes it very, very tough. And there's no real A&R in record labels in the music industry at all anymore. Now, a good example of this was back in the day, an artist would probably write 100 songs and record a lot of them, and then from there, they would decide which were the best ones to go on the album. Whereas nowadays, they write a bunch of songs, they put them in demo mode, they throw 20 seconds out on TikTok, they go, should I release this? A bunch of people go, yeah, you should release this. Those get released. Why do you need A&R? That is the A&R process. The A&R process is now the people themselves. But when songs and music are so cheap, why not just throw this stuff out there? This is not the 80s or the 90s. This is not soul or Motown, where you used to get years, if not decades, of development of an artist. Nowadays, you've got a couple of months worth of development in front of everybody on social media, and then you throw it out. If it doesn't work, it doesn't matter, because there's so many other people who are doing the same thing. And this goes back right to the early stages of every artist with their education, from music colleges, music universities, music teachers being too scared to actually put some boundaries around music to help artists in that way. There's too much subjectivity. And so what happens is the freedom to create is great, but students aren't pushed to explore their boundaries in the same way. And the reason I believe that is because music education has become far more about the technicalities than anything else. A technicality for, let's say, for social media is, should you post at 5 o'clock or should you post at 6 o'clock? So who cares? That doesn't make any difference. That's not the point. The point is this going to make a difference? Is this going to emotionally touch somebody? Is this music going to be put out there and people are going to say, oh, I really relate to that and I understand it? That's not a technicality. That's identity. That's artistry. That's literally a narrative. Those are the things that we should be working on, but that's subjective. So therefore we can't in today's education. So what happens is we go back to technicalities, which is production skills. And production skills for video and production skills for audio are important, but it's not the be-all and end-all. Nirvana made a record for like $600, like a phenomenal, seminal piece of art for $600. Why? Because they stood for something. Because they understood that they stood for something, and they understood the narrative, and they understood their avatar, they understood their demographic, and that demographic saw this band, listened to the music and said, this is unbelievable. This has changed the needle. So with all of these evolutionary and technological changes that are homogenizing music, where is songwriting right now? Because what you are getting is lyrics that are a lot less subtle. You are getting songs that have a lot less structure. You have very little modulation. You have very little dynamics in a song. And it's not like songwriters are doing anything wrong. They are rewarded by numbers. And if they're not rewarded by numbers, then why would they be experimenting with their art or their message? At the moment, commercial success is more about compromise than it is around experimenting and the art itself. Talent and uniqueness has been replaced by narrative and relatable. Relatable is so important because that's your identity. Who do you represent? And those people that you represent feel something because they have a connection, because they understand. They understand the message. They understand who you are. That has always been the case in the music industry. But now it is so far rammed down your throat that has become more important than the music and the structure and the songwriting itself. Music has less time to bed in. It needs to be so instant. We are living in an ADHD world, but that's consumption. That's not music. That's not the music industry's fault. That's people's fault. Did you know that the average song released has decreased in length by 20 seconds over the last 5 years? The difference is of where the song is being housed and why people will listen to it or why they won't listen to it has now changing the evolution of the songwriting itself. Now, this isn't just a music industry problem. This is everywhere. If you look at Hollywood, the top grossing films of 2023, 3 of them were superhero films. Then you had The Fast and the Furious and Mission Impossible. Get in, get your popcorn, and I'm going to give you 2 hours of explosions and color everywhere. These films are designed for instant gratification in the same way as the music industry are now designing songs for instant gratification. Now, this might change. TikTok might go away and something else might come in its place. But until that happens, the music that we are listening to will evolve around the place that it is being housed. The reality is, no matter how much money the labels will pour into the marketing budget of a Dream Theater track, which is 16 minutes long, it will never ever go to number 1. It can't, because it can't be housed in the place where pop culture already is. This is a market driven by algorithms and short attention spans. There is little room for creativity and nuance. This is a repetition that has been going on for decades. When CDs came along, no one liked vinyl. When vinyl came along, no one liked that it was taking artists away from the gigs. TikTok has come along and no one likes micro content. And something else will come along, and at some point in 20 or 30 years' time, everyone will look back fondly at micro content and say, why can't we just go back to that? That's just the way the world works. But from a songwriting point of view, people aren't doing anything wrong. What songwriters are trying to do is they're trying to hack the algorithm in the same way as they were when it was MTV, in the same way as when it was vinyl, in the same way as when there were record labels who had all of the power. But I think the big question isn't, is songwriting dead? I think, will songwriting be revived? Will songwriting come back round? I think it will. I think something will come along that will revive this idea of songwriting needs to be more than just this homogenized same old, same old. I don't know when that will be or how it will be, but it will probably because there is something that music is attached to. So what do you think? Is songwriting dead? Can songwriting be revived? Or, like me, do you also believe there is so much great stuff out there? The problem isn't that songwriting is dying. The problem is we don't get to hear about it because of all of these algorithms and because of the people's consumption on these technological platforms. I find this stuff absolutely fascinating because I feel like I'm on both sides, because I really love great music, but at the same point I also really love the control and the power that artists have to be able to get their music heard and have that control to monetize. And it's like, it's such a juxtaposition between the two things, and I kind of want both. I want the power and I want the control and I want the monetization, but I also want the art and the experimentation, and I want the artist to be able to do stuff that I think is awesome. It's a really tough balance, but I want to know what you think in the comments below. Is songwriting dead? And if so, what happens next over the next 10, 20, 30 years? Is that it? Is this the end of the music industry? Is this the end of songwriting? Or will something come back round? And if so, what do you think that will be? I'd love to know in the comments. Anyway, thank you so much for watching. I'll see you guys soon.